Hey everyone, welcome back to the shop. Glad you could join me. This video is about backdrops, and when I constructed my layout, I hadn't really addressed how I was going to do backdrops. It was definitely a shortcoming on my part to not think about this. I started scenery on the long wall, and I have not been crazy about the fact that you can see through the trees and all you see is blue, because I didn't take into account any kind of painted backdrop or a photo backdrop. The next layout I build will be photos for sure. I have a couple people I follow on YouTube and Facebook who do amazing things with photos, but I didn't really want to do that on this layout, and so I decided to try to paint my own backdrops. I'm not going for hyper realistic here. I'm just going to give really more of a sight line, so when you look through the trees you don't just see blue sky. So this video is going to follow the steps on how I first of all experimented with a piece of scrap masonite with the techniques, and then I did the technique actually on the wall. I did about a 10-foot section, maybe a little bit more of layout. Actually it's probably closer to 12 or 13 feet long. I had mixed feelings about it, but as it dried and as it finished, I ended up really liking it. I also did some base scenery, which I didn't cover in the video. I'll talk a little bit about what I did in it later on in the video, but that'll probably be another video of how I do my base coating to get started on scenery. So I hope you guys enjoy this video. It's tough doing things backwards, but that's often how I do my modeling and all sorts of different things. Is I end up spending a lot of time fixing the problems I created for myself. So, alright, let's get started. So, I've done a couple things in the past where I painted kind of generic hillsides. I also have done masonite forms with ground foam applied on the current layout. What I thought I would do tonight is I painted a piece of scrap masonite with my same backdrop colors, and I was going to start adding a series of low hills in a couple different greens, and then I would work to stipple it with a sea sponge. So I'm going to start with putting in the rough outlines of the hills first. Hopefully you can see the pencil lines that I've drawn. The next step would be apply the first coat of green. So the first step is to choose a couple different colors of paint. These are just simple craft paint. And I'm going to go with the dark on the first run. This will be any middle trees, and this will be the stuff in the background. So my shop is pretty cold today, so I'm going to make sure I got this mixed up really good. Just going to use a simple palette. Really large kind of a shading brush, and I'm going to start laying in this green. This may actually take 2 coats to get it to cover over this regular latex house paint. I'm also not sure it's completely mixed up. What I'll do is I'll get myself my first coat and give that paint another shake. And again, this is a test piece for me. I want to treat it with a mottled kind of surface once I get the greens down. I'll go back over it and try to fill in with different colors. I model the end of September in the Adirondack, and so I want a touch of color, but I don't want it very garish and overdone. I've been working on the trees on my layout and working them into mixing in fall colors. Yeah, this is probably going to take 2 paints of this color in order to get it opaque. I'm trying to get larger brushes. I also don't know if the temperature here in the room is affecting me a little bit. So I'm going to finish this coat, and then I'm trying to make it as smooth as I can, the transitions, so it looks like faded off in the background. So let this dry. Come back and see what it looks like. So it's still drying, and I worked in the next green, and I think once I get a second coat on it, it'll look good. I kind of blended the wet edges a little bit. I'm not looking for a sharp demarcation here. I'm looking more for kind of a blended look. So I'm going to add this last color in a couple places, and that way the whole thing can dry, and then I can come back and put other coats on it. Again, this is easy working on my workbench. Doing this in place is going to be more difficult. My second thought, if this isn't what I'm looking for, is to do sections of masonite cut in a hill profile to fit and cover them with flock on a workbench, and then place them into place. So I'm going to try this first. Like I said, I've done this before and was relatively successful. So I'm going to try this. This craft paint dries pretty quick, and so I'm just going to put another quick coat. This is the lightest color. I'm going to fill it in kind of in here and in here, and then we'll let it dry and then go back and take a look at it. So it's dried up pretty good. I'm going to try to put this darker green on, see if I can finish up and get it opaque. Again, I'm not sure what the issue is. It could be the paint, although I've shaken it up quite a bit. I may end up living with it because I'm going to model the surface using some natural sponge, and we might not see it. So again, it's an experiment, so let's see what happens. I'll probably experiment on another part of this with a different green and see if it's just this particular bottle of paint. I peeled the seal off of it, so I believe it's new, but new can be a relative term. I may have had it laying around the shop for quite a while. So we're ready to move to the next step. I'm getting some paper towel together. I'm going to try to do like a dry brush. I'm going to use this crappy disposable little plastic container so I can get a pool of paint in here. These are the sponges that I'm using. I just got them from Michael's. I'm going to start with this Spanish olive color and just kind of dab it over the green. just going to do a small little bit. Don't really need a whole lot. Gonna work the paint in the sponge a little bit. I'm going to kind of alternate it back and forth. What I'm trying to go for is a indistinct forest on the background. And I'm going to do this by layering in colors. I'm just going to start with this olive color. I'm going to try to keep it from bleeding on to the other background. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do here for the back. I might dab on some really pale grayish green. Alright. So that's the green. I'm going to use a little shamrock. That's what I get for opening the paint over the project. There's a lesson. Alright, so same sponge. Again, working out some of the paint so it's not too heavy. Giving a little twist so it doesn't have like a regular uniform color. I used a different bottle, same color, same manufacturer, to do the green this morning before I left for work, and it was much better. And I actually think it's older. So I'm not sure what the deal was. But I definitely had trouble getting it to be opaque. I'm going to kind of blend this edge a little bit. I don't know if there will actually be any color that comes through, because I think it's pretty much the same color. Now that I've done the greens, I'm trying to decide if I should do one more green. Do just a little bit of this really light green. I think I like how it's coming out. I think it's a... I'm not really crazy about that. But like I said, I'm trying to do like non-distinct trees. I don't want to see individual trees. What I want is splashes of color and a hint. Alright, last colors I'm going to do is I have a dark yellow, I have a terracotta, and I have a red. I dropped the bottle, and the first time I've ever seen this happen, it cracked. So, give this a little bit of shake. I'm going to grab another sponge. These three colors, I'm going to go very lightly. Like I said, I model September. So the leaves are just starting to change. I picked that time of the year because it would be when the last of the tourist season is finishing, and they would be heading into hunting and logging season. Alright, so I got this sponge pretty clean. I'm just going to do some yellow. And this, I'll give it on the backs a little bit. And kind of concentrate it in a couple of spots where you would see like a group of aspens or birches. I think when I do this on the layout, that green is really aggressive, and I think I'm going to look to use something more like this section in here and go even lighter. So again, same sponge. I'll try to get in a different spot. Dab it off. I don't really mind if it gets a little bit of the yellow mixed in there. I like the way that's looking. I think if I use a lighter color, like I said, you can see I'm getting a little bit on the second color. Alright, next color is this red. Luckily I had this bottle. Like I said, I dropped it and it just hit right to crack and put a hole in the paint. Alright, I'm gonna grab another piece of the sponge. This is a really bold red. Work it into the sponge. Try to get most of it off again. I don't even mind if there's some darker patches. Most of this backdrop is going to get covered up by foreground trees. So really just trying to give it a look so that it's not so blue behind it. That's the problem I'm having, is that it's like a ridge line with my my trees shining behind it, instead of it being looking like there's hills behind it. So now I've set it into place approximately where I want it. I want to fill these areas through here, and then in here, and then through here. So in the background here, this is what I did with ground foam, and you can see it's got different colors, and this is kind of the effect I'm trying to go for with the painted backdrop. As I said, I think if I lighten the color on the main part of the hill, I'll get closer to what this looks like. Hello everyone. So I got thinking about this backdrop and I ended up hating the way it came out. And I actually just watched a YouTube video where a guy did a much more dabbed surface. So what I did here is I used a couple different brushes in sizes. I used 4 of these different color acrylic paints, and I just dabbed with the different brushes into it to give it more of a treed look. I'm still okay with the back, but the foreground I feel is much better than what I did originally. I just couldn't get that to look right. First of all, it was too dark, but I think this just blends it together and looks much more like a forest. I'm not sure where I'm going to end up here. I'm going to do some of the fall colors. I really want to do very, very, very lightly and very little, like just the woods is starting to change, so very small spots. So these are basically the colors I used last night with the sea sponge. That paint is no good. Let's see if we could shake it up. Try that. Alright, so we're just going to try some dabbing. Again, I'm going to just use this small brush right here. I'm trying to go for is like a little stand of maples which are one of the first trees to change. I'm liking this a whole lot better than what I did before. And that's really, I mean, that's part of the process. That's part of the, every time you do art, which is really what we're doing, the vehicle is model rareting, but we're doing art, is experimenting and trying new things. Down here on the bottom, we could probably go with some bigger splashes because it would be in the foreground. Yeah, I'm really digging the way this looks better than it did before. Definitely a nicer product. And I figure if it's ever too bright, I can just go back over it with some of the olive colors. I actually think that's a little much. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to clean this brush out the best I can. I'm going to go in with this really light olive I got right here. Mix in some of the darker. And the lighter. Try to smooth out some of that more abrupt coloration. Fade it out a little bit. Yeah, I think I'm not crazy about the little teardrop kind of shapes, but again, work in, kind of cover them up a little bit. So in the end, I think using the darker green for the very back, and then coming back and just cleaning it up with a little bit of different colors of greens. I want to make sure I get that whole ridge line kind of covered up, so I don't have that dark green. And I'm blending out this corner. This side too. So now I've put it back into that place on the layout, and I do think it's better. I like it way better than what I did before. So I think this is probably the method I'm going to use. I'm going to use a lighter green than I used for the foreground and get the main part, and then the two lighter colors for distant hills. Could actually mix like a gray and a green and really maybe even add in some more. And then I'm going to just come along and stipple with a couple of different greens in the colors, and then a little bit of fall foliage. I'm pretty happy with the way it looks. Again, most of it will be blocked by trees, but I think I'm pretty happy with it. Here's an example. So by the time you put those foreground trees in there, it'll start really covering it up, and you'll be seeing this across the top. Like I said, just trial and error. If the first thing doesn't work out, try something different. So I'm going to start working this backdrop in, and I'm going to start by drawing in where the darkest green is going to be. I'm going to come back up on the far side. So when I draw this, when I start painting it, I'm going to kind of use this pencil line as my break point. I'm going to work into that corner, but I'm going to have to get something to stand a little higher. Alright everyone, I have gone through and I put the first coat of paint. This is much nicer paint. It makes a much more opaque coverage. This is the second coat. I'll be filling in some of these valleys that run in here and behind it with at least 2 other types of paint color as I go. I'm going to let this dry a little bit more, and then I'm going to come out and start adding the back hills behind it. I was able to work this area right in here a little bit down into this ground foam profile I did. I'm probably going to do, let me turn the camera here, I'm probably going to do some olive hills behind here to give it the same effect as I'm doing on the other part of the layout. Let me see if I can turn this around, give you an idea of what the whole backdrop looks like. It's a very bright green. It's not as dark as my test was, and I should be able to go over it much better. And come around the corner. In the very corner, I'm going to end up doing a hillside that goes up above this mountain in here. Then coming around, I came down through this valley and back around. I worked on blending and shading the backdrop over the past couple nights, and it's okay. Most of it's going to be hidden by trees, especially the darker green, but I wanted to give it some variation where it might be peeking through. The back peaks will be more visible probably. So it was just mixing colors on the foreground. I actually had to redo the foreground because it was still too bright. It still shows really bright like this, even though there's some pretty serious olive colors there. And the other thing I did, let me come back over here. Over here on this side, this is the upper reservoir for the paper mill. And I struggled with this section. The paper mill is down over here. And I really struggled with this to get this to the point where I was happy with it. And I'm still not 100% happy with it. I'm a land surveyor by trade. I deal with a lot of construction, and it helps and it hurts my modeling because I'm always trying to make sure it makes sense. Like, would you find this in real life? And this reservoir is a bit of a struggle. I'm planning on heavily foresting this area to block the view from the sawmill. But on the backside was really awkward, and this is one of the things I really struggled with, is how I was going to end it. So I am a fan of a person named A.F. Tate. A.F. Tate was on the edge of the Hudson River School of Artists, and he did a lot of stuff in the Adirondacks. He did a lot of stuff in Raquette Lake itself. I have a few of the prints in my house, and this is pretty typical of what he did. Let's see if I can get this into a better light. This is fairly typical of what he did. The same time of year as my layout is set. So I took these ideas, and I am no painter. That has become abundantly clear. But I took these ideas and I transferred them over to the back side of the reservoir. It's okay. I'm pretty happy with it, considering I'm not much of an artist, and there'll be plenty of trees on the sides, both sides, to kind of make it work. But we'll see how it turns out. I was thinking about doing it with paint. I thought about doing it with a photo. Went back to paint. So we'll have to see what's going on. I kind of gave a hint of the evergreen trees. Again, I probably should have used a fan brush, but I was really just trying to go for a look. I have a couple other sections on the layout that I'm going to end up doing this backdrop treatment. So I'll show you what I did. As we come around, this is called Odell Landing. This is named after a friend of mine that passed away. It's at the top of the switchback. In the foreground, you can see this haul road. The scenery was handled a little differently here because this would be where the trees would have been cut, so almost immediately the underbrush would come up. I still have to do, this is the reservoir, the upper reservoir for the sawmill. So as we come across here, this is where the switchback cuts downhill in the back and comes uphill in the front. So there's a mix of evergreen trees and deciduous trees in here. The evergreens are sisal, twine, and florist wire. And I kind of tried to vary it so that you had, you could see, like in the real Adirondack forest, you'll end up with, sections where there's evergreen trees and sections where there are deciduous trees. So this is as far as I got. Come around over here. So this is the conundrum that it's led me into, where this is the part I haven't done, and I was afraid this was going to happen, where this is what precipitated me doing the layout backdrop, was I didn't like how you can see the blue sky behind here. So in the end, I think I'm going to end up unplanting all these trees, which of course are all super glued in, and do a lower version of the backdrop painting all the way from that corner, which is called Uncas Landing, where my poor Barnhart is tipped over. That's at the edge of the clear cut, and then redo it all the way around. I'm pretty burnt out on this project right now. I'm going to end up doing a deep cleaning on the layout and getting it ready for an operating session. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a break, but I do think I'm going to have to carry the backdrop. When I step back here, you can see it really fixed that problem that I didn't like, where now you see the mountainside behind it. So that's kind of where we're at. I appreciate you guys following along with me, and like I said, a lot of what I do is fixing the things I should have done in the first place. This backdrop would have been a whole lot easier if I had done it before I had started scenery. The corners were miserable. The corners are a difficult decision. This is a fairly small shelf layout, and I could have coved the corners, which would have made it easier with curved backgrounds, but I didn't want to lose the real estate. And I really like how that pitches up in the corner there, and I really like how that little gorge kind of goes up in the back, but reaching in underneath there, it's over 30 inches, I would say, from the foreground in, and it was really difficult, especially this side. I know from working on the layout before, Uncas Landing is miserable. I scratch built 2 logging docks there, and I built them in place, and it was miserable. So I'm really not looking forward to that. But I'll continue the scenery and keep working on this foreground. You can see the texture from the plastic cloth, but I haven't also done the final textures, and I have not done the ballasting. So, alright guys, I'm sure there'll be more videos. Thanks again for stopping by the shop.